Welcome back, everyone. We're breaking down UFC 271, Adesanya versus Whittaker 2, and we have a pretty stacked 15 fight card here. The main card is looking super solid. Even the prelim fights are really good. I mean, a lot of these fights would probably be on the main card of a fight night. So, very solid fights all around. Lots of young prospects to be excited about. Lots of good matchups, honestly. So, we got a pretty stacked card here, all in all. Really looking forward to it. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. And, of course, going to do the recap real quick. And, going forward, I think I might just break down, or at least just recap my bets from the previous card instead of just going over the full card. So let me know what you guys think about that. I'm not even sure if anyone's interested in the full recaps, so I just want to trim the fat down a little bit. So just let me know in the comments. I'll see if it's something that I'll continue to do moving forward. But taking a look at the previous card, felt like I had a pretty bad night, but somehow ended up breaking even. So right off the bat, the first leg of the parlay busted with Dennis Bondar. I mean, not much to say there. The guy's arm broke, so really unfortunate. I do think if the fight, gets extended, that we'd see Bondar take over in the second and third round. And, we'd see the rest of the parlay cash. But, it's unfortunate, it was a decent-sized parlay there. But, I guess we'll go over the second leg, which is Erosa to win. Definitely seemed like a much closer fight than the odds would indicate. But I did feel that Erosa would win in a lot of these situations, in a lot of these close fights. I just felt that Erosa, with his work rate and his pace, he'd be able to win at least 2 of the 3 rounds, and that's pretty much what he did. Peterson is a pretty scrappy fighter, and he did put up a good fight, but ultimately I just felt that Erosa was just a level above, and that Peterson's really only chance to win this was to win via knockout, and definitely seemed like he was close, but Erosa, showed a lot of heart there. And at the end of the day, I just don't think that Peterson's someone with a ton of power or finishing instinct. And I'll just say this: if Peterson had actually decided to cut all the weight, I do feel it would have been a little more lopsided, and we see Erosa potentially get the finish as well. Because I do think those extra few pounds could have, potentially affected the cardio and maybe even the durability of Peterson, because Peterson, he was, I think, wobbled at a certain point as well. So not that it really matters. That leg of the parlay didn't even cash. So moving along, took a small poke on Stolyarenko. I think I had like half a unit divided between just the money line and the decision prop. Thought it'd be a pretty close fight if it was a striking affair, but it was just a clear levels fight, and Stolyarenko didn't do herself any favors just playing off her back that whole first round. So it is what it is there. I mean, half a unit, not terribly upset about it. And moving along, Mike Trizano decided to take a 1 unit stab on him. I thought it'd be a pretty close fight. I did think that the power and maybe the physicality of Dawodu would be an issue, and it definitely was, but I didn't think it'd be that big of an issue. Dawodu did a great job of clinching up with Trizano every time he was hurt as well. So, Dawodu won that pretty decisively. Definitely underestimated the power there a little bit between the two. But moving along, Tresean Gore, Brian Battle. So this one was a little frustrating because I don't think the read was terribly off. I did say Gore was a very patient striker in there, and he was a little too patient in that first round. I think that if he had decided to unload a little earlier, just bite down in that first round instead of letting Battle just get off on the leg kicks, the fight would have swung in a completely different direction. Because one, if Battles, or if Gore's, biting down early, when he's fresh early in the fight, he could potentially have landed much harder shots, possibly put Battle out, or at least hurt him enough to really stifle some of the output and make Battle really respect the power of Gore. But by the time that Gore had really started to pick up, it's already been like halfway through the fight, and it was just a little too late. Don't want to get too into the hypotheticals here, but I do think if Gore had started a little more aggressively early, we could have had a much different looking fight. But it is what it is there. So we move on. And then the last bet that did not cash was a small play on Barrio to win in round 3. And this was a fight I thought would be kind of close. I honestly thought it would go to a decision. Did not expect Chidi to just completely blast Barrio out of the water in that first round, but I'd figured it'd be a fight where Chidi would have a pretty solid first round, start to taper off a bit in the second, and then we see Barrio pick it up towards the end of the second round, and then start to really pour it on in the third round, which Barrio does have a tendency to do. He is someone who builds into a fight and who does finish strong. So I thought that, if it would get extended, Barrio would have a shot at maybe getting the finish late. It was just like a small 0.1 unit poke. Obviously, he gets destroyed in the first round, so it never really even came close. But that'll do it for the bets that did not cash. So let's take a look at the ones that did. Castaneda in round 3 was one of them. Very happy that did, actually. Kind of saved the night, honestly. And nothing more satisfying than hitting a round 3 prop, especially when it's like 20-1 almost. A lot of these round 3 props are like, usually like 10-1 or like 12-1. So really like the odds there. Just figured that, Castaneda's got pretty good cardio, pretty good pace and output. Johns is someone that slows down. And honestly, I thought the most likely outcome would have been, Johns winning the first 2 rounds and then being able to survive that 3rd round. But with where the odds were and the fact that, Castaneda does have solid cardio and is someone who is generally pretty tough, that, that 3rd round would get a little dicey. So I decided to take the shot there, and definitely paid off. But usually when you have someone that slows down versus someone who is, it's got good cardio, I think that 3rd round prop is, pretty good, especially, at near 20-1, couldn't pass up on that. So glad that cashed. So we'll just keep it moving along. I had half a unit on Maximov to win by decision. I felt that if Maximov was able to weather that first round, he'd be able to get his wrestling going come the 2nd and 3rd round and just be able to grind his way to a decision victory. And overall, it was a pretty uneventful fight, but Maximov is someone who will attack the wrestling. He's very reliable to go there. He knows his strength, and he was able to kind of grind his way to a victory there. So glad that cashed. And at plus like 400, I felt that was just very good value there, anyway. So we move along. Phil Rowe, Jason Witt was almost going to pass up on this fight, but money kept coming in on Witt, so I had to take a shot on Rowe here. Witt obviously had the path to victory in the wrestling, but I really am not sold on the cardio of Witt for one, and Rowe is someone who will, he will do a decent job of working his way up to his feet and making his opponent, really expend his cardio. And yeah, I just felt that Witt just does not have, 3-round wrestling cardio. We saw him slow down pretty significantly in the Barberena fight, and he was hurt pretty bad in that fight. So if Rowe is able to make Witt work the first round and a half or so, he'd have a decent chance of potentially getting the knockout on Witt, and that's exactly what happened. Witt's got a pretty bad chin, so once he'd used up most of his energy, hitting those takedowns, trying to control Rowe, he'd just kind of be a sitting duck there, and Rowe was able to get the knockout in that 2nd round. And lastly, I had Sean Strickland as well, my biggest play of the night. He came through, cashed that pretty easily. We saw Hermansson go for the takedown aggressively early, didn't materialize, and he basically just got pieced up for 5 rounds. Pretty egregious judging there. It was pretty clear decision for Strickland. I don't know how that was a split. But just taking a look at that matchup real quick, we see this time and time again with Hermansson. If he isn't able to get that first or second takedown, he does seem to be content to stand and trade. He's did that with Vettori. There was one round where he was able to work the grappling, but outside of that, didn't have a lot of success. Saw that with the Cannonier fight as well. Had about 1 round of grappling and then got knocked out the next round. So Hermansson, while he is a really good grappler, he's really only got 1 round where he's going to be able to try and get you out of there. Outside of that, he does seem to fall off quite a bit, and will kind of relegate himself to the striking. And when it comes to the striking, I think Strickland's just the far superior striker. So that cashed pretty comfortably there, and really happy about that. Overall, ended up breaking even on the night. The parlay really fucked it up, but it is what it is. And I actually had another parlay set up with Almeida and somebody else on this card, which I'll probably get to a little later in the podcast. Anyways, ended up taking Almeida as a big juiced favorite. I thought that the size would be could potentially have been an issue for Almeida, but when they sized up at the weigh-ins, it was very clear that Almeida is just the much bigger, more physical guy in there. The measurables on paper favored Marquez, but when they were next to each other, I think there was just way too big of a physicality difference. So I felt that if it went into the grappling, it would definitely favor Almeida, and I just thought that the only way Almeida loses this is if he gasses himself out early and we see Marquez take over. But Marquez is kind of gassy himself. And on top of that, if Almeida decided to, he'd probably have just a lot of success holding Marquez up against the cage or just laying on top of him because he's just going to be the much bigger, stronger guy. And that ended up cashing pretty easily. So, let's keep this moving along because I wanted to keep this shorter, but it ended up going past 10 minutes anyway. So let's get right into this UFC 271 card. We have 15 fights, so, we got a lot to break down here. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Kicking off the card, we have Jeremiah Wells versus Mike Mathetha, and no odds for this fight yet. Not a lot of tape either in regards to the Mathetha side, but I'll just go over Jeremiah Wells real quick. And Wells, he is a pretty big action fighter. He's got very heavy hands on the feet, very explosive, very big power. The guy's a solid athlete. Does seem to have a strong jiu-jitsu base as well. I've seen him just take opponents down, kind of just hold him there. He's got very heavy top pressure. He's got a decent ground and pound, and he's got a solid submission game as well. So I do think he's a pretty dangerous fighter. Overall, he's dangerous on the feet, and he is dangerous on the mat as well. He is getting a little up there in age, but he's still very young in his career. So I don't think he's got a ton of wear and tear, but he's a little older to be a prospect now. Regardless, I do think he's a pretty dangerous fighter regardless. But he'll be going up against Mike Mathetha, which, I have not really found any footage on. I think there's some kickboxing footage, but it's kind of old. But all I really know about him, though, is he trains with Izzy, and that's probably why he's getting a spot on the card. But really, just not much information on this guy, unfortunately. So, I hate to kick off the card with the big old nothing burger of a breakdown, but it's just hard to say much about him since I haven't really seen him in any of his MMA bouts. But I will say this, if Wells opens as a dog, or if I can get dog odds on Wells, I'm probably just going to blind bet a unit on him just because he's going to be going up against, I think, a very green fighter, or at least a very green MMA fighter in Mathetha. Wells is a dangerous fighter as well. So, he could potentially catch him on the feet. He could go to the wrestling, go to the grappling. So, I don't think it's going to be too likely, though. I think he's probably going to open as a favorite. So, I'll probably just go with Wells, by default here, just because he's gotten more fights. I think he's probably the more well-rounded fighter. I think it's unlikely that this Mathetha guy is going to be some super prospect or some phenom or anything. So I'm going to go with Wells. I think he's got a few paths to victory. He could probably knock him out. He could probably knock out Mathetha. Could probably get the submission as well. So I'm going to go with Wells, but very little confidence, all things considered. So give me Wells here. And moving along, we have Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Sergey Morozov, and Morozov's the minus 210 favorite. Comeback on de Andrade is plus 180, and this is a very interesting matchup for me. We have your typical grappler versus striker, de Andrade being the striker, Morozov the wrestler grappler, and de Andrade he is a very strong Muay Thai striker. He's got very heavy hands in there. Not the highest output, but, he does a pretty decent job of, consistently just throwing. He's got a decent jab. He's got a good kicking game as well. He does a good job of attacking all three levels. The issue, though, is, he is getting a little bit older. At 36 at bantamweight, it is a little bit concerning. But that said, he hasn't really shown a ton of regression. I mean, he still looked quite solid in most of his recent fights. But here's a fun little stat for de Andrade here. So, with the exception of the Barao fight, the Ghost of Barao, he's basically lost every fight he's been taken down in, right? So, that's going to be, I think, a bit of a factor here because Morozov is someone who is very aggressive with his wrestling. He has generally been pretty consistent with going to it. I'd say outside of that Nurmagomedov fight, he's generally pretty reliable to look to get the wrestling going. And, he's got pretty good entries, but, his top control, I think, is very solid. He's someone who generally does prioritize the control over, the ground and pound or even the submission. So he's a pretty solid control wrestler, grappler. He did a good job with it against Taha where, he kept it close-ish competitive on the feet for like the first 2-3 minutes of the fight and then just went to the wrestling and was able to control Taha for the remainder of the round, just close out the rounds really strong and just win, I think, a pretty dominant decision in that regards. And, I do like that from Morozov. His striking isn't isn't particularly great. I think that on the feet, we're going to see Andrade honestly get the better of Morozov. He should be landing the heavier strikes. Andrade should. He's going to be, I think, the more seasoned striker in there as well. So on the feet, I think it's pretty clearly Andrade, but I do expect Morozov to attack the wrestling. And, I did say before, outside of the Barao fight, Andrade has lost all of the fights he's been taken down in. But I do have to say, there is a bit of nuance in those fights, because the guys he's losing to, or the guys that have been taking him down, Lerone Murphy, Piotr Yan, Rob Font, and Tukugov, all guys who I think are very competent, even high-level strikers, right? Tukugov is a very well-rounded fighter who's got a decent striking game. Font, very good boxer. Yan, obviously, very elite striker, the uncrowned champ in there. And Murphy is a decent prospect with some good striking as well. So I think the difference between them and Morozov is obviously, they're much better strikers, and they were already winning on the feet to begin with. And, them being able to hit takedowns was, I think, kind of predicated on that. Whereas with Morozov, I don't think he's going to be winning on the feet in the striking exchanges. So I do think that Andrade will probably have a little better success, defending the takedowns. But that said, though, we did see Piotr Yan have a bit of success with the wrestling, was able to take the back of Andrade for a little bit and kind of just hang off him for a good chunk of that second round. So I do think that if Morozov is able to get in on the legs of Andrade, maybe hold him up against the cage a little bit, he could ride him out, really look to tire him out as well, because I do think that at 36, and with how well muscled Andrade is, in these extended grappling affairs, he will start to slow down a little bit. And I will add this, Andrade, hasn't really fought someone who will exclusively look to wrestle with him, and Morozov will do that, and I think he will do it pretty aggressively. So I think, that first round, it could be a bit close, but I think once Morozov starts to get the wrestling going, he'll start to wear on Andrade a little bit. And we do see, I think, a fight similar to the Taha fight for Morozov, where, he'll probably be losing a bit of the striking exchanges early in the rounds, but then we see him just hit a takedown and look to control Andrade for the remainder of the round here. So I do think that Morozov wins this. I don't think it's like a super wide margin, though. I do think that the wrestling, it should be enough to close out the rounds and do enough to mitigate the striking of Andrade early. So I'm gonna go with Morozov here. I think the wrestling should be enough to get it done for him to win via decision. And in the next fight, we have Jacob Malkoun versus AJ Dobson, and Dobson's going to be the -140 favorite. Come back on. Malkoun is +120, and I have no idea what Malkoun did to piss off Dana or the UFC, but they're pretty intent on matching him up with some heavy hitters. It legit feels like they're trying to end this kid's career, because he makes his UFC debut against Haas, who he's somewhat seasoned, I guess, but Haas does have big power, and he is a wrestler, but basically gets starched early, and then they match him up against Alisson basically as like a rebound, right? Or at least that's what it seems like, because, Alisson was on a bit of a lose streak, and they had just seen Malkoun get knocked out by Haas. So, they figured that, they'd give Alisson a bit of a layup here, and that Alisson would just starch Malkoun here. But Malkoun was able to kind of foil those plans, go to the wrestling, and basically just lay on top of Alisson for a good 3 rounds and win a pretty decisive decision. And really, that's all we know about Malkoun, right? There's a little regional footage of him, but, not very extensive. But I think from what we have seen, Malkoun is going to be someone who can wrestle a bit, he can grapple. But his striking did not look great. However, he has shown he could fight to a game plan and fight to exploit his opponent's weaknesses. So, you got to respect that a bit. And, going into this fight, he is going to be a bit up against it again. He's going to go up against AJ Dobson, who is a pretty heavy hitter himself, very aggressive, similar to Alisson, very big power, and will move forward and just chuck bombs in there. Dobson is, he's much less experienced, though, and I do think he's a little less technical than Alisson. Dobson is someone who does seem to get a little wild with his striking. And that said, though, he is very aggressive with it. He will bite down and move forward, even if it means taking a few shots. And, we did see that in his most recent fight on the Contender Series against Arkaga, where, I had zero regard for his own his own well-being, just moved forward and was just throwing heat at Arkaga. But overall, I do feel this is a somewhat tricky matchup because, on the Malkoun side, we have seen him, up against two heavy hitters, and, he won one and lost one, got finished in pretty spectacular fashion, and then won the other one in, I'd say, pretty dominant fashion. So, it's hard to see how he's going to perform long-term against these aggressive, power punchers. And on the other hand, with Dobson, there's very limited footage of him and a ton of red flags, honestly. He's beaten a lot of low-level guys. Kind of the same with Malkoun, but, he's also been in, really quick fights as well. Lots of early finishes, combined with the fact that we haven't really seen much from his takedown defense or bottom game or how he looks when he's extended, makes it really tough to pick Dobson here from, at least for a money line perspective. You might want to take him to win by knockout or at least first-round knockout, because I do think that his best path to victory here is just to go balls to the wall early and just catch Malkoun. But I do think that, if he isn't able to get Malkoun out of there, we see Malkoun go to the wrestling again. And, we just have not seen too much from the defensive grappling for Dobson to know how he's going to look when he's on his back, if he's going to gas out or not, or, if he's going to even be able to get his way or work his way back up to the feet. But, pre-fight, I'm just going to go with Malkoun here. We have seen him execute a pretty solid game plan, against these power punchers. And, the fight that he did lose against Taz was a fight where, I believe it might have been booked short notice or something. And it was his UFC debut where, it looked like he was definitely a little tentative in there, right? He was backing up from the beginning, seemed a little hesitant to throw, basically. And then his second fight in, he looked a lot more comfortable in there, knew what he needed to do to win, and was able to execute. So I do think that Malkoun could pull it off again here, especially with how aggressive Dobson fights sometimes. He'll just swing big, and we could just see Malkoun just duck under and hit a takedown. So I think Malkoun's got a path to victory here, but on the other hand, Dobson's going to have, I think, a pretty significant athletic advantage. And he's going to be the much heavier hitter. So if Malkoun isn't able to get him down early, I do think it's pretty live for Dobson to hit that knockout, because Dobson is, he's super explosive in there. But ultimately, I think we see Malkoun weather it, and I think he can win the second and third rounds with his wrestling. I'm not sure if he can get Dobson out of there, because, again, we haven't seen too much from the defensive grappling of Dobson or his cardio, right? So if Dobson just gasses hard, he could potentially get finished in the second and third. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Malkoun here. I do like him, especially at dog odds. I think there is a path to victory for him as long as he doesn't get starched early. And in the next fight, we have Carlos Ulberg versus Fabio Cherant, and Ulberg's the -205 favorite, come back on. Cherant is +175. And we'll start with Ulberg first. He's a pretty solid offensive striker, honestly. I think he's a decent athlete, does seem to have a bit of power, very dynamic striking as well. Overall, I do think he's got a pretty solid striking game. He does a good job of mixing up the kicks. He's got good distance striking, decent clinch striking. By all accounts, it does look like he passes the eye test. There are a few concerns with him, though. He is quite hittable, not very defensively sound in there. And he is still very green. He doesn't have a lot of fights, and it kind of showed in his last fight, right? Because prior to that fight, he was fighting some pretty low-level guys, and he was getting a lot of finishes. So, going into that fight, I think he might have underestimated his opponent a little bit. And on top of that, I believe Nzechukwu was kind of handpicked to go up against Ulberg for his debut. So he probably thought, he had an easy fight in front of him, and it kind of showed, right? He came in there very aggressive, looking for the finish. Honestly, he was sitting down really hard on his shots. He was pushing a pretty crazy pace, and eventually it just ended up gassing out in that second round. So I do feel that Ulberg does need a little more time and a few more fights to really figure out his limitations and just know to really pace himself a little better. And I do feel that was potentially a learning experience for him. But overall, I do think that there still are some concerns with his game. But, I do think he's got a solid camp, and hopefully they've learned from that experience and maybe have a better game plan coming into this fight, because it looks like they're trying to build him up a bit, because they're giving him a very winnable matchup in this fight against Cherant, which, not a fighter that I'm super high on. Honestly, I'm not really sure what he does well, to be honest. He seems to be a big power guy, but he's not really knocking anyone out. all of his finishes are via submission, a lot of them earlier in his career as well. So it might be a scenario where he's just kind of club and subbing these guys, slightly lower level, or maybe he's just able to muscle his way to a submission. But I do suspect that he's kind of just out-athleting these guys. I think the last two fights kind of reinforce it for me a little bit. He's taken a step up in competition, against guys like Knight and against Menefield, who are able to match his athleticism, and they were pretty much able to just kind of run through him, right? Like, these guys aren't even like the most skilled fighters in Knight and Menefield. So I do think that when he's getting that step up in competition where guys are just, a little better than him technically and are able to match his athleticism, he will struggle a little bit because, he got knocked out by Knight, which, fair enough. Knight's a really heavy hitter, but getting subbed by Menefield, is not a great look, especially since Menefield's not really a grappler. And, honestly, I don't know if we'll see Menefield sub anyone ever again. So that was a pretty crazy fight. But yeah, looking at this matchup, I do think that on the feet, Ulberg is just the much crisper striker, and he's going to have the physical advantages as well in terms of like the height and the reach. So I think this will be a pretty tough fight for Cherant, honestly. I think Ulberg he should take it pretty clearly on the feet. The grappling, I think, might be a bit of a toss-up. I think Cherant might be the better grappler, but I really don't know the extent to Cherant's grappling, right? I just know that he's got some submissions early in his career. I have seen him look to get into the clinch, wall install a little bit, but overall don't really know how good he is there. So yeah, I really think that that Ulberg should take this. I also think Ulberg's probably got better cardio than Cherant. I've seen Cherant just gas out pretty hard on the regionals. I know Ulberg gassed out pretty bad in his last fight as well, but he was pushing just the most crazy pace in there. I mean, he landed like 100-something strikes over the course of like 8 minutes. So I do think that, with a bit better pacing, he could go 3 rounds pretty well. I think throwing 100-something strikes over the course of 3 rounds is still a phenomenal pace. And so I think if he spaces out his striking a little bit more, he'll have a lot more success here. So yeah, I think Ulberg should win this, but at minus 200, he's really going to have to show me that he's able to make those improvements. And I would like to see a little more from his defensive grappling to really, drop the hammer on him. So I like Ulberg in this spot, but really don't think I'm going to look to bet him or even parlay him. But I do think he wins this. And in the next fight, we have Renato Moicano versus Alexander Hernandez. And Moicano is the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Hernandez is plus 150. So pretty interesting matchup here. Hernandez, a very interesting fighter overall. I mean, he's had some ups and downs in his career. I think he's a phenomenal athlete. Very explosive striking, very heavy-handed in there. I think overall, he's got a lot of power. He's shown he could wrestle a little bit, but the issue with me for Hernandez is, he is a bit reliant on that power and athleticism to get that early finish. A lot of the time he's able to just bum rush opponents, just swarm him early and get him out of there. Against lower level guys, he's had a lot of success doing that, but we have seen when he gets to step up in competition against better fighters, more experienced fighters, guys who are able to keep it tight, keep it technical in there, stay defensively sound. He will struggle a bit, especially after that first round, when he's kind of exhausted himself a little bit, throwing those big power shots. He does slow down a little bit and then does seem to fall off, as the fight progresses. But overall, I really don't think that Hernandez is a terrible fighter or anything. He's got a lot of tools, but he just hasn't really been able to put it all together. And he'll be going up against Moicano, who is a very solid fighter himself. Moicano's got really solid Muay Thai striking. He's got decent power on the feet. He's got good leg kicks. But I think where he really shines is going to be in the jiu-jitsu realm. Moicano's a very slick submission artist. He's very aggressive on the ground. He's got submissions over guys like Hadzovic and even Cub Swanson. And on the feet, he's no slouch there either, right? He's outstriking guys like Cater and Stevens. He was piecing up Ortega before it was cool. Just all around a very solid fighter. But what's really been holding him back is going to be the chin. He's been knocked out 3 times already. So, going up against someone like Hernandez, who's a very heavy hitter himself, got to be a little bit concerned. That said, though, I do think that if Hernandez isn't able to land that big power shot, it could be a pretty tough fight for him. because skill for skill, I do think that Moicano is the better fighter. I think he's a little sharper, a little more technical on the feet. I think if Moicano can just stay defensively sound in there, avoid the big power shots of Hernandez, he should be able to outpoint Hernandez. But I think the big key to victory here for Moicano is going to be hitting those takedowns and possibly looking for the submission. But with that said, though, I do think that Hernandez has actually got decent takedown defense, and he's got pretty solid get-ups. Hernandez is pretty hard to hold down. We saw in the fight against OAM and even against Cowboy, Hernandez did a pretty good job of working his way back up. I mean, the guy's just so physically strong in there. It's kind of hard to hold him down for extended periods of time. But taking a look at the line here, I think it's pretty accurate. I do favor Moicano to win, but not at like a crazy high clip, because I do think the striking overall is probably going to be pretty even. I did say I think Moicano is the more technical striker in there, but if this turns into a brawl, I do think that Hernandez got a decent chance of clipping Moicano. Moicano does have a pretty decent advantage on the ground, but he is going to have to get the fight there. And, if he isn't able to do that, the fight's going to take place, primarily on the feet. And if that happens, I think it's going to be somewhat close. And of course, he's going to be live to potentially get knocked out. But, I think overall, I do have to favor Moicano, because I do think he's just the better fighter. It's just the chin is a little unreliable at this point, and there's not a ton of footage on the submission defense and the defensive grappling of Hernandez. But overall, I do still have to favor Moicano here. He's the slightly more experienced fighter. I do think Moicano's fought the better competition in there. And, we have seen historically Hernandez struggle a bit when he gets that step up in competition. Obviously, styles make fights, and, this is a fight stylistically that I do think Hernandez can win. But skill for skill, I just think Moicano's the better fighter, so I got to go with him. And moving along, we have Ronnie Lawrence versus Martinez. And Lawrence is the minus 280 favorite. Comeback on Martinez is plus 240. So we'll start with Lawrence first. A very young, exciting prospect here with Lawrence. He's one of these guys who's just got a crazy cardio in there and is really good at weaponizing that pace. He's got really, really good output, really high pressure sort of fighter. He's got lots of movement on the feet, lots of side-to-side movement, very good feints, very good kicking game. He's always looking to paw at opponents too. He's just never still in there. He's constantly moving, constantly working. Overall, his striking game isn't the best, but he is someone who's got a very high work rate. But I think where he really shines is going to be in the wrestling. The guy's capable of just spamming takedowns, hitting 7 or 8 takedowns in a fight, and just puts an absolute pace on his opponents. Top control could be a little better, but I think it kind of plays into his game a little bit. Let his opponents try and, use their energy to work his way back up before just taking them down again. So I do think that with his skill set and attributes, it really kind of works. It works out, basically. I do think overall he's a very solid prospect. And, with what he brings to the table, I think he's got a pretty bright future in the UFC. His opponent, Martinez, pretty solid prospect as well. He's got pretty slick striking, good counterpunching, very good accuracy and timing. But he is a bit limited in that regard. He's got a lot of early finishes, pretty low level guys, but, a lot of early finishes on the regionals. So we don't really know how he looks when he's extended. We've only seen one fight, and that was a really weird fight, really weird circumstance as well for that fight. But by and large, Martinez is a finisher, and, he's definitely going to have opportunities to potentially catch Lawrence in this fight, but, I do think he's going to be up against it here. If he isn't able to knock Lawrence out early, I think Lawrence's cardio is just going to take over in this fight. Lawrence probably going to be able to hit 7-8 takedowns in this fight, and, once he's able to hit that first or second one, I think Martinez is going to have very little chance to knock Lawrence out, because I think once Lawrence gets that wrestling going, it's going to be hard for Martinez to really get any sort of offense going. He's going to be using all of his energy to try and just stay on his feet. And even on the feet, I think it's going to be hard for him to clip Lawrence. Lawrence is very slippery in there. He's got lots of good movement, lots of feints. So it's going to be hard for Martinez to get the timing down on Lawrence. So, I think this is a pretty straightforward fight. I really like Lawrence in this spot. Outside of Martinez just clipping him early, I really don't see too many paths for Martinez here. So I think Lawrence wins a pretty dominant decision, and I could potentially even see a late finish as well, because we've only seen Martinez extended, I think, like once in his career, and that was a pretty low-paced striking fight. I think once Lawrence is starting to hit those takedowns, he could potentially wear on the cardio of Martinez pretty significantly. And we have seen Martinez submitted before, so maybe the submission defense isn't quite there. So once Martinez starts slowing down, he could potentially just give up a choke or something. So I really like Lawrence in this spot. I think he wins pretty dominantly. So I'm looking to put him in some parlays, maybe even just play him straight, because I really like Lawrence in this spot. Outside of that early knockout, I just don't give Martinez too high of a likelihood of winning this fight. So I'm going to go with Lawrence in this fight. And moving along, we have Maxim Grishin versus William Knight. Pretty interesting matchup here. I believe Knight is coming in short notice. Grishin was supposed to go off against Herman, but Herman pulled out. But taking a look at the lines real quick, Grishin is the minus 170 favorite, and the comeback on Knight is plus 150. So we'll take a look at Grishin first. He is primarily a striker. He's a pretty seasoned regional fighter, in my opinion. On the feet, he's got pretty dynamic striking. He does a decent job of mixing it up. Does seem to have a bit of pop in his shots as well. Does a decent job of mixing in the kicks, and does a decent job of countering as well. So, overall, I do think Grishin's a pretty solid striker. The thing is, he is getting a little older, slowing down a little bit, and, his output isn't particularly great. That said, though, I do think he's still, pretty good on the feet overall. I do think he's the much better striker in this matchup as well. And, wasn't able to see too much from his grappling, which definitely was something I was trying to keep an eye out for in this matchup. But yeah, I've seen Grishin look to hit takedowns occasionally, but he's not someone who's going to pursue it aggressively. And defensively, he's all right. He did get dominated by Tybura, but that was up a weight class. His takedown defense looked okay against Antigulov. Was eventually able to get the finish in that fight, and then his fight against Jacoby was mainly just a stand-up affair. But overall, I do think that his takedown defense should hold up here. I'm not sure how aggressively Knight is going to go to the grappling, but Knight is someone who, he's he's very physical, right? He's absolutely yoked in there. 5'10", 206 pounds of just pure muscle. But overall, I don't really rate him all that highly. I think he's someone who is a bit reliant on just using his power and his physicality to win fights. He's got knockout power for sure, but, he's not very technical on the feet. He's out there winging some of his punches, he's closing his eyes in some of these exchanges. Even when it comes to the grappling, he's kind of a bit of a strength bully in there. He's very explosive with his takedowns, but he'll also use his strength and his power to kind of just hold opponents up against the cage, hold him in the clinch, and just kind of bully them there a little bit. So, overall, I don't think he's a super skilled fighter. He's just really fucking strong. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do favor Grishin in there a decent amount more. Skill for skill, I think Grishin is just the better fighter. I think he's the much better and just more technical striker in there. He's also the more experienced fighter. He's going to be the much taller and rangier striker in there as well. So, I favor a lot of the attributes for Grishin here. The size does, or the age does worry me a little bit, and also the durability a little bit. We've seen Grishin hurt before, and Knight can definitely crack in there. But outside of that, I don't know what the win condition for Knight really is. I don't think he's going to be able to outpoint Grishin. I don't know if he's going to be able to out-grapple Grishin here. So, outside of just landing a bomb on Grishin, I just don't see too many paths to victory for Knight. I honestly just see Grishin being able to stay on the outside, just really work the kicks, and kind of just pick at Knight at distance, because we did see Knight struggle a bit with the distance striking of Menefield. The only issue with Menefield was he kind of gassed out, wasn't able to maintain that pace and output. Ended up having to go back to the just wall install and drop two rounds because of that. But Menefield was having success at distance against Knight, and I think that Grishin's just a far superior striker. He's far more mobile, a lot more movement on the outside. So I do think that Grishin should take this on the feet. And, I haven't even talked about the wrestling or the grappling yet, because, Grishin hasn't really shown much of a grappling game. But on the other hand, Neither did Dao Jung, and Dao Jung was able to pretty much just take Knight down and lay on top of him for 15 minutes. So maybe if this fight does get a little dicey on the feet, we see Grishin go to the wrestling a little bit. Can't really rely on him to do it because we haven't seen him do it. But seeing as how that's just such a big hole in Knight's game, they might just look to try and exploit it a little bit. So overall, I do like Grishin here. I think outside of him just getting bombed on early, he'll likely take it on the feet. And, if he does decide to take it into the grappling department, he should win there as well. So I really like Grishin here. And right now I do have him as a second leg of the parlay that I had with Almeida from last week. So I kind of like Grishin in this spot. Obviously, the power of Knight does concern me a little bit, but I do think overall that Grishin should be the better fighter. I think he should win a pretty clear decision here. And in the next fight, we have Alex Perez versus Matt Schnell. And Perez is the minus 400 favorite. Come back on Schnell is plus 300. So yeah, this was a fight that was actually rebooked. They were slated to fight a little earlier, but it got pushed back. My thoughts for the fight hasn't really changed all that much. The line's still pretty wide, but I'll break the fight down anyways. And we'll start with Perez. So Perez, he's a very well-rounded fighter. He's got solid boxing on the feet, decent output. Can't get a little wild in certain exchanges, but overall, he's got, pretty decent boxing, pretty heavy leg kicks as well. He does have a wrestling base, and overall, he's just a very solid, well-rounded fighter. He's got decent cardio and output. He could work for all 3 rounds, mixing the wrestling at any point. I think his chin might be a little suspect, but, outside of that, I don't think he's got any overwhelming weaknesses, but at the same time, I don't think he's like, phenomenal anywhere. But overall, I do think he's a very solid fighter. With Schnell, though, he is a pretty decent fighter himself. He's got, nice, crisp boxing, does seem to have a bit of power, a bit of pop in his shots. And on top of that, Schnell is a pretty dangerous submission grappler. Well, maybe not dangerous, but he is a pretty sneaky submission grappler. He is someone who will pull guard, he'll attack the guillotine, look for triangles and stuff. So, he is kind of dangerous off his back, but it's also kind of bad because he will play off his back and, give up a good amount of control time. So, this could be a pretty difficult matchup for him, especially if Perez, looks to attack the wrestling. We could see Schnell stuck off his back for extended periods. But, that said, I do think that, Schnell will pose some problems for Perez. Perez, like I said before, does have a pretty suspect chin, and Schnell is someone who's, I'd say, can crack on the feet. He's pretty snappy with his punches, and if he's able to find the chin of Perez, he could potentially put him out. And on top of that, Schnell is, I think, a pretty crafty submission grappler. So if Perez is getting careless with his takedown attempts, he's not. If he's not careful, he could potentially get caught in something, get caught in a guillotine or even like a triangle or something by Schnell. So, overall, I do like Perez in this spot. I think he's a little more well-rounded. I do think that, if Schnell isn't able to pull off the submission, we see Perez have a lot of success with the wrestling. But I just can't really get over the price here. At minus 400, I would pretty much expect Perez to be a lock here, but it doesn't feel like it because, I do think that with the way Perez fights and some of his weaknesses do kind of play into what Schnell does well. So while I do think Perez wins, I definitely feel that the line is a bit wide here because I do think Schnell could potentially, catch Perez on the feet, and he could catch him on the ground too. But, if he doesn't, I think Perez should win a pretty dominant decision. So official pick for me is Perez. I think there is a pretty clear path in the wrestling here for him. I think he can keep it competitive on the feet as long as he doesn't get caught there. But I'm going to go with Perez here, but I don't think I'll be betting him. Minus 400 again is pretty wide. If anything, I might take a small poke at Schnell inside the distance. Maybe he's able to catch Perez. But outside of that, I do think that Perez can probably keep it pretty competitive on the feet. I think that, if Perez is able to mix in some of the wrestling, he should be able to win a pretty decisive victory here. So I'm going to go with Perez, but not really liking the price. And moving along, we have Roxanne Modafferi versus Casey O'Neill. And O'Neill's the minus 350 favorite. Come back on. Modafferi is plus 285. And pretty interesting matchmaking here. Kind of feels like the UFC is trying to give O'Neill a bit of a push, give her a name on her resume. And, while I don't think Modafferi is the best fighter, she is someone who's been around and will be, I guess, a decent test for someone like O'Neal, who's looking like a pretty solid prospect. And Modafferi, I think, is on the tail end of her career. She hasn't looked particularly great recently. Not that she's looked great before, but, she's on a pretty noticeable decline, I think. I've always found her striking to be a little janky in there. Somewhat serviceable, but it's not great. She can grapple a bit. She can work in the clinch, look to wall install a little bit, get a bit of control time. But by and large, I don't think Modafferi's that good of a fighter. I feel she's been able to take advantage of fighters who don't have good defensive grappling. She's been able to kind of exploit that a little bit. But by and large, I just don't think that Modafferi's that good of a fighter. She's gotten some decent matchups in there, and then she's kind of gotten by with just being a very tough, gritty, tenacious sort of fighter. And now I feel like she's getting a bit older. She's talked about retirement, and overall it just seems like the game's kind of passed her by a bit. So I think this is going to be a really tough fight for Modafferi. She's going up against a really solid grappler in O'Neal, and we have seen Modafferi struggle a bit when it comes to the defensive grappling. And, O'Neal does have pretty solid defensive grappling also, so I don't know if Modafferi is going to be able to bully O'Neal around in there. On the feet, I think it's probably going to be pretty competitive. O'Neal's not a fantastic striker or anything, but neither is Modafferi. And, Modafferi being a bit older, she might, be a little slower in there as well. So I think I might edge it towards O'Neal in terms of the striking, but I don't think it's really going to matter there. O'Neal's a very consistent grappler. She's someone who's been able to get all of her fight to the ground. So, she hasn't shown like terrible fight IQ or anything, and she does a pretty good job of fighting to her strengths. So I like that about O'Neal. And when she is able to get the fight to the ground there, she's got really aggressive ground and pound, very aggressive submissions. She's not just looking to hold her opponents there and just grind them out. She's very intent on looking for the finish. So I really like O'Neal in the spot. The price tag, not the best, but, I do think it's somewhat justified, even though O'Neal is a little bit green. It's just, I have a hard time seeing Modafferi get the dub here. It's just, I really don't see Modafferi being able to bully O'Neal like she did against some of the other fighters like Andrea Lee and stuff. So I got to go with O'Neal here. I think she could win a pretty dominant decision. I think she could kind of just get a ton of control time over the course of 3 rounds. Don't know if she's going to be able to finish Modafferi. Modafferi's pretty damn tough, and I don't think she's been submitted before, so I do think that she should be able to survive this fight. I mean, Modafferi took an absolute mauling from Santos last fight and was able to gut it out to a decision. So I do think Modafferi might be able to survive here. So I'm going to go with Casey O'Neal. I think she wins a pretty dominant decision. And in the next fight, we have Andrei Arlovski versus Jared Vanderaa, and Arlovski's the -170 favorite. Come back on Vanderaa is +145. And this should be a pretty decent heavyweight matchup here. Should be a striking affair. Both guys tend to want to keep it standing, but we'll start with Arlovski first. Very seasoned veteran in there. Very high-level guy. Very experienced striker. He's done a decent job of adapting his game, developed a more counter-heavy point fighting style as he started to age. Does a really good job of kind of slowing down the pace, and, I think it's really helped extend his career. But, the issue with that, though, is it does lead to some very low-paced, very close fights. And really, I think that's going to be the concern for me in this fight for Arlovski, especially since he's a pretty moderately sized favorite here. It's just that, with Arlovski, you do want to take him as, close to pick'ems or as a dog, just because he does tend to fight really closely in these fights. So just a slight concern there. I guess some of the other concerns with Arlovski is going to be the durability and potentially the cardio. Arlovski's taken his fair share of damage. He's been dropped. He's been hurt before. The chin's a little suspect. I don't think it'll be too big of an issue here. Vanderaa is not a very big hitter, but I think the cardio might be problematic. We've seen Arlovski slow down. We saw him slow down pretty significantly against Felipe in his most recent fight. And, Vanderaa is someone who will move forward and does push a pretty decent pace, at least on the feet. So I do feel there's a good chance Arlovski probably drops the 3rd round if it ends up being like a moderately paced striking affair. But going back to Vanderaa here, Vanderaa is pretty low level heavyweight, honestly. He's not like a terrible fighter by any chance, but he is someone who is pretty tough for the most part, and he is someone who will move forward and throw volume. And really, the only fighters Vanderaa really struggled against in the UFC are fighters who've been able to wrestle and grapple him, take him down, and pretty much just control him and beat him up there. And in this fight, Arlovski's going to give Vanderaa the fight that he wants, right? Because Vanderaa, he's done pretty well against strikers for the most part. Granted, much lower level strikers, but if we do want to do some quick MMA math here, he beat Tafa pretty soundly. Carlos Felipe barely beat Tafa. That was a very close fight, and Arlovski fought in a very close decision win against Felipe. So not saying that Vanderaa is going to win this here, but I do feel that it should be pretty close on the feet, given both guys have fought pretty competitively in terms of like the striking against similar level opponents. So while I do feel that Arlovski, he is the more experienced fighter, the much more technical striker in there, I just think that this is a pretty 50-50 fight. I think the striking exchanges are going to be pretty close, and I do feel that Arlovski's likely going to drop that third round. So, if Vanderaa is able to squeak by in, one of these first two rounds, I think there's a good chance that Vanderaa is able to steal a decision here. So overall, I feel it's a very 50-50 fight. So I'm probably going to take a shot here on Vanderaa. He's a decent-sized dog. So official pick for me is going to be is Vanderaa here. I really think it's a 50-50 fight, and it would suck to see Arlovski lose to someone like Vanderaa, but at this stage in Arlovski's career, I just don't think he's got too much left in the tank. I'm not saying he hasn't really fallen off a cliff or anything, but I do think he's kind of looked his age recently. Fought really competitively with guys like Sherman and Felipe, who are just not the best fighters, guys who are, I'd say, similar level as Vanderaa, but at least I know that Vanderaa is going to be able to move forward and throw volume. Felipe kind of does that, but he starts pretty slowly, and we did see him start to pick it up later in the fight, but I do feel Vanderaa is going to be pretty consistent with this output for all three rounds, and for that reason, I'm going to go with Vanderaa here. I think he wins a pretty close decision. And moving along, we have Nasrat Haqparast versus Bobby Green. And Green's going to be the minus 165 favorite. Come back on Haqparast is plus 145. And, this should be a pretty fun striking matchup with two pretty fun strikers here. Green, the much more seasoned vet, while Haqparast, I think, is the up-and-comer, even though, he's had a pretty rough patch of fights lately. But, I do still think he's a solid prospect still. He's a very dynamic striker in there. He's got very crisp boxing, good combination punching. He's got solid forward pressure as well. Overall, I do think he's still a pretty decent prospect. He'd like to see him round out his game a little bit more, but, I do think he's quite solid. But it does look like he's struggled a little bit when he's taken that step up. Obviously, getting knocked out by Dober in that first round a little while back, was definitely a step back for him. But, Dober is a very dangerous striker. Dober has had a history of just putting out some of these prospects. And on top of that, Dober's just a super seasoned fighter as well, even outside of the UFC. So can't hate on Haqparast too much for that performance. And he is coming off of a loss against Dan Hooker, which was kind of a weird fight, honestly. Haqparast didn't seem like he was really in the fight. Was definitely a lot more tentative than he usually was. And, there were some extenuating circumstances around that fight as well. I believe his mother had passed away that week, and they weren't even sure if the fight was going to be on. I think there was like some potential visa issues, and he didn't even get to the venue like 2 or 3 days before the fight. So really weird there. I know Hooker was in a similar situation, but Hooker's just much more seasoned, and Hooker was able to go to the wrestling as well. So tough fight for Haqparast there, and I do give him a little bit of a pass in that fight. But we'll take a look at Green, who's a pretty high-level boxer himself, very slick offensively, a good defensive boxer as well. And honestly, Green's shown a little bit of wrestling also. He's not like a super aggressive wrestler, but it is something he will mix in once in a while. So, pretty solid, well-rounded game for Green. And on top of that, he's, very experienced in there. 30 pro fights. That said, though, he is getting a little older. I think at like 35, he's starting to get up there at age, especially at featherweight. So, or lightweight, I think, actually. But regardless, he's getting a little older. And on top of that, Green is someone who's, I think, a little lackadaisical in offense. He's not someone who, usually runs away with the fight. He fights pretty close most of the time. So I generally like to take Green when he's a decent-sized dog, and then maybe his opponents when he's like a decent-sized favorite, like in this spot. But, Green just tends to have pretty bad fight optics. He's someone who's going to just shake his head and, shrug when his opponents land on him, which is, generally just not a great look, because you're kind of just telling the judges that you're getting tagged, basically. So, don't really like how he does that. And, he's not someone who will generally put a pace on his opponents either. I mean, he's got decent output, but he's not really a big power puncher either. I know he's coming off of a knockout win, but, I mean, let's be real here. He knocked out a realtor. So I'm not really buying that Green's a power puncher now. By and large, he's more of a decisionator. So taking a look at this matchup, I do think that it's going to be a pretty close fight, honestly. I think they're going to give each other the fight they want, and it's going to be a striking affair. And I think it's going to be pretty back and forth, pretty close. So for that reason, I'm probably just going to be on the Haqparast side. I like the pressure and the pace that Haqparast brings. He's very aggressive. Not in the Hooker fight, but in usually most of his fights, he's the one moving forward and, throwing combinations. So I like that about Haqparast. And, I don't like the fight optics that Green brings to the table as well. Green, obviously, the much more seasoned fighter in there. But, he's also going to be much older, and I do think that we might see a bit of a speed advantage for Haqparast. And on top of that, I think there might just be a bit of a power advantage for Haqparast as well. Like, it might look like he's landing some of the heavier shots. I guess similar to the Fiziev fight, but not to that extent. I don't think Haqparast is as heavy of a hitter as Fiziev, but I think it'll be along that vein, basically. But, I do think ultimately this is a really close fight. Bobby Green, his stock, it's at an all-time high right now, I think. Coming off of a pretty close, loss to Fiziev and then a knockout win over Iaquinta, people are going to be really high on him, but I do think that at the end of the day, Green is a pretty unreliable fighter and not someone you want to be laying too much juice on unless it's against a realtor. So, I feel this is going to be a vintage, Bobby Green 29-28 split decision loss sort of fight. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Haqparast here. I think I'm going to put a unit on him as well. Might even put a little bit on Haqparast by decision, just because I do think this goes to decision more often than not. Neither guy's like phenomenal like hitter, and both guys do seem to be somewhat durable. So, yeah, I think this goes to decision, and I do think that Haqparast edges it, or more so, I think Bobby Green kind of just throws it away with the fight optics here. So, give me Haqparast here to win via decision. And in the next fight, we have Kyler Phillips versus Marcelo Rojo. And Phillips is going to be the minus 350 favorite. Come back on. Rojo is plus 285. And it should be a pretty fun fight. Should be a banger, honestly. Both guys are pretty offensively minded. Both guys, very high action sort of fighters. But we'll take a look at Phillips first. So, he's got very good movement on the feet. He's got, really good offensive boxing. He's got a solid body kick that he likes to throw. Overall, I think he's got great, striking, good timing and accuracy on his shots. He has shown he can mix in the wrestling a little bit. Overall, just seems to be a pretty well-rounded prospect. He does like to mix in some of the spinning attacks as well, which, sometimes it can be a bit ill-advised, especially, in fights that are pretty close. And he's, starting to slow down a little bit in as well. It's just not a great idea to be repeatedly, throwing those spinning attacks and leaving openings for opponents to either take you down or just land some counters. And, you whiff on those, you use up a lot of energy, and you give yourself, or you give your opponents opportunities to take advantage of. So, I think his fight IQ is a little questionable in that regard. Pretty much lost him the fight in his most recent loss to Paiva. That was a weird fight, honestly. It was a fight he arguably could have gotten the stoppage in the first round, at least gotten a 10-8, but then decided to repeatedly go throw spinning attacks, in the second and third round, leave openings for his opponents to make the fight much closer than it should have been. He really should have won that fight, but the fight IQ was honestly what lost him that. And he's going to have to be careful doing that against Rojo, who, is a solid fighter, nothing crazy, but, Rojo is someone who is very aggressive offensively. And if you start to slow down against Rojo, he is someone who will continue to move forward and will start putting it on you if you start to slow down later in the fight. But overall, though, I really don't think Rojo is that good of a fighter. He's not bad, but, he is someone who is, he's very hittable defensively. And is more or less just someone who is super tough, will move forward and just throw volume for all 3 rounds. So Rojo, I think, definitely does pose some stylistic problems for Phillips, but overall, I just think that Phillips is the better striker. I think he's much sharper on the feet. I think he's the heavier hitter, and he has shown he can wrestle a little bit. So I think, all in all, Phillips is the more well-rounded prospect, the guy with a bit more of a ceiling and a lot more potential. Whereas with Rojo, we kind of have a feel for, how good he is. He's, I think, a very solid regional fighter, but, we have seen, even on the regionals, him struggle a bit when he gets that step up. And it has shown, I think, in the UFC a bit as well. So overall, I really do like Phillips in this matchup. I think it's similar to the Paiva fight. We have 2 guys, in Rojo and Paiva who are, pretty durable, and they will move forward and just throw volume despite the fact. So pretty similar matchup, really hoping that Phillips is able to pace himself a little better. Hope he really, learn from his loss to Paiva to really be a little smarter with his shot selection as well. And, I think if Phillips, if he plays it smart in there, he could definitely win 2 of the 3 rounds. I do think he's potentially live for a knockout as well. Rojo, very careless with his defense, really just walking into shots a lot of the time. So, Phillips could potentially get the finish early, like he did against Paiva. Paiva has shown, I think, a lot more durability than Rojo, and if Phillips is able to land clean early, he could potentially get Rojo out of there. And even if he doesn't, I think he's got the tools to win at least 2 of the 3 rounds pretty soundly. So I got Phillips here. I think he gets it done either by knockout or decision. Both are pretty live. I don't know if I want to go back to the well with Phillips here after he burned me in his last fight, but I do feel that fight was a bit of a wake-up call. And, if he just makes those minor adjustments, I think he could have a pretty dominant performance in this fight. So give me Kyle Phillips to win this fight. And in the next fight, we have Jared Cannonier versus Derek Brunson. And Cannonier's the minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Brunson is plus 150. So very interesting matchup here between, I would say, like a striker and a wrestler here. Cannonier being the striker. Very powerful striker, very heavy hands. The guy used to fight at heavyweight, so he's got a lot of power for sure. He's a very dangerous striker. He's got some very nasty leg kicks as well. And I'm pretty sure he's got like knockdowns in 4 of his most recent wins. So, the power does translate, I think. And, I think his cardio is pretty solid as well. He's not like a super high output sort of fighter, but he does do a really good job pacing himself and making his opponents respect him and his power throughout the whole fight. His takedown defense is all right, but, most of the guys taking him down were at light heavyweight, so, much bigger guys in there. And, Branch and Hermansson were able to take Cannonier down, but, Cannonier does a really good job of making his opponents work to get those takedowns, and Cannonier actually does a pretty decent job of working his way back up to his feet. And, while he's doing that, his opponents are also expending a lot of energy. And, we saw that, he's able to kind of wear them out early and then eventually just get the finish just because they're a little tired from trying to take him down and hold him down. So I think that's going to be a very big factor here in this fight, because Brunson, he's a really solid wrestler and has had a lot of success with the wrestling lately. He's on a 5-fight win streak, and I think his last 3-4 fights, he was able to very effectively mix in the wrestling, because before Brunson was someone who would kind of just move forward and just chuck bombs in there. But lately he's become a much more well-rounded mixed martial artist, I should say. However, I do still have some pretty serious doubts about his chin. He's been caught and knocked out before, and even in his most recent fights that he did win, he did get hurt and wobbled, but he was able to go to the wrestling to let himself recover a bit and also just to ride out his opponents for the remainder of the round. And I know a lot of people cashed on Brunson in his last 3 fights. He was a pretty decent-sized dog in most of those fights. And I'll be honest with you guys, I did not. I took his opponents in all 3 of those fights. I ended up picking Shabazian, I picked Holland, and I picked Till. Every single time I thought, okay, this would be the time that, his opponent would be able to keep it standing and find the chin of Brunson. But time and time again, Brunson was able to go to the wrestling and just dominate his opponents on top. But I think this is where it stops. I think this is finally it. I think this is finally when Brunson gets caught. I swear it's going to happen this time because Cannonier's different. He's much different from the previous opponents that Brunson's had success against. Just taking a look back, guys like Till, Holland, both guys who are, they're more or less welterweights. I know they've fought at middleweight before, but I do think they've got more of a middleweight frame. And then Shabazian also, does not have cardio. So, he was able to go to the wrestling pretty effectively. But, Cannonier is a really big, strong guy. He's a legit middleweight. And, he's going to be much more stronger and much more physical than guys like Holland and Till. And on top of that, Cannonier's not really been one to be held down. He does a pretty solid job of working his way back up to his feet and really making his opponents work. So, I don't think that he's just going to be on his back like Till or Holland. And Cannonier is also just a much stronger, more physical fighter. So, he's going to be landing much heavier shots, and he's just going to be much harder to take down because he's going to be, a lot stronger than Till and Holland. I think that he's probably got, better balance and stuff as well. So it's going to be tough for Brunson to take him down and hold him down. I think that, if Brunson isn't able to get his wrestling going as effectively as before, he's going to get clipped on the feet, especially as he starts to slow down in the fight. Maybe we see Brunson, have a bit of success early. He's able to take Cannonier down and maybe hold him up against the cage for 3-4 minutes. But I do believe Cannonier's really going to make him work, and he might even hurt Brunson early. But I think come the second and third round, when Brunson's really starting to slow down and fatigue from all the wrestling and the grappling, we're going to see Cannonier find the chin of Brunson. So I'm going to go with Cannonier here. I think he finally does it. He's going to get the knockout, and I think he gets it done in the second round. And in the co-main event, we have a heavyweight bout between Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa. Lewis is the -185 favorite. Come back on Tuivasa's +160. And I do think this is going to be a pretty fun fight. I think there's a decent chance someone gets knocked out here. And overall, I do think it's a pretty straightforward matchup. We have two guys who are pretty heavy hitters who do generally like to stand and bang in there. Tuivasa, pretty much exclusively a striker, a little one-dimensional in that regard. He does have some really heavy leg kicks that he likes to throw. He's got a decent clinch game. We'll look to maybe, push his opponents up against the cage, put his weight on them a little bit, look to dirty box also. But by and large, he is a striker. I don't think I've really seen him look to hit offensive takedowns. His bottom game, I think, is okay. It's nothing great. He's struggled a bit against better grapplers, but I don't think this will be much of an issue here. Lewis isn't a phenomenal wrestler either. Lewis is someone who will look to just stand and bang as well. Lewis, very big power on the feet. He's live for the finish at any point. Pretty straightforward, breaking him down. He can be a little passive, just waiting for that big shot. Defensively, I don't think that Lewis really likes taking too much damage. He does a decent job of playing possum sometimes, either to catch an opponent off guard when he's coming in or look to just kind of stall out a fight a little bit. Sometimes he'll do that, and opponents, they'll be a little wary of his tricks, so, they'll kind of ease off a little bit. So, Lewis, he's an interesting fighter for sure. But overall, I do think we know more or less what we're getting with him. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's a pretty interesting fight. I think that on the feet, Lewis is probably going to be the heavier hitter. Tuivasa's definitely got some power as well, and he can clip Lewis, but it goes the other way as well. We could see Lewis just land a bomb on Tuivasa, especially if they start slugging it out in the middle. But taking a look at this matchup, I do have to favor Lewis here. Lewis, despite being someone who probably doesn't have the best technique in there, doesn't have the best volume, it does take a certain level of striker to get Lewis out of there. I mean, Cyril Gane, recent title challenger, very high level striker, and JDS, DC, very high level guys in there that were able to get him out of there. And you can even say Volkov as well. Up until that really late knockout, Volkov was pretty much piecing up Lewis, but these guys are very high level fighters, very high level strikers in there that that Lewis is dealing with. And I just don't know if Tuivasa's quite at that level just yet. I had some doubts about Tuivasa going into the Sakai fight, and I do feel he's eased some of those concerns overall, but I don't know if he's quite at that level yet. That said, Tuivasa is still very young. I think he's only 29. So there's going to be a bit of an age difference in this fight. And Tuivasa is looking like he's making improvements fight to fight. So, I'm not saying Tuivasa's got no chance. I think he's actually got a decent chance. But I just think that overall, Lewis is just the much heavier hitter. I think he's the bigger fighter, honestly. Tuivasa and Lewis are, similar stature in terms of their measurables, but Lewis, I think, is the much bigger heavyweight. I think his frame's much bigger, and he is more muscled up. That said, Tuivasa might have the speed advantage. Those leg kicks could be a big issue for Lewis, and should this fight get dragged on a little bit, Tuivasa starts landing on Lewis, he might just kind of look for a way out, because Lewis is, I think, a fighter who, if you start putting it on him, he's kind of just going to crumple up a little bit in there. But to do that, Tuivasa is really going to have to pour it on Lewis, and I just don't know if Tuivasa is going to do that. We have seen Tuivasa not shy away from a firefight, but at the same time, Lewis is a very heavy hitter, and Lewis does a decent job of kind of suppressing the volume of his opponent. So, we could see Tuivasa a little hesitant in there, especially if Lewis is able to land a few clean shots on Tuivasa. Tuivasa maybe feel the power of Lewis and be a little gun shy after that exchange. But, just going back to this fight, I do favor Lewis overall. I just think he's the much heavier hitter in there. But Tuivasa, he has shown a decent chin. He did get hurt and wobbled by Hardy a couple fights ago. And, if it wasn't for the terrible fight IQ of Hardy, I think Hardy may have been able to get the finish. Hardy was just being really reckless in there. But, I do think that if Hardy's able to land like that on Tuivasa, I think that Lewis has got a shot too. And Lewis is not the fighter to look to trade with Tuivasa after he's got him hurt. I think Lewis is going to be much more composed in there and pick his shots a lot more carefully if he does hurt Tuivasa. Anyways, I like Lewis in this matchup. I think he can get the knockout, but I do have to say this about a lot of these heavyweight fights, especially with two guys that have big power like this. I do feel the fight ends inside the distance, but there's a chance we see both guys a little tentative in there. They might not want to leave too many openings, and so we see a somewhat mildly low pace sort of fight. But of course, we could see them just look to bang it out in the middle. But just throwing that out there, because sometimes these fights do tend to eke to the over if both guys respect the power of each other a little too much. So ultimately, I'm going to take Lewis to get it done here. I think he gets it done in the first round. And in the main event, we have Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. The rematch between the two. Adesanya is going to be the minus 260 favorite. Comeback on Whittaker is plus 220. And I think this is a much-deserved rematch between the two. I feel Whittaker kind of, quote-unquote, did it the right way. Loses pretty decisively the first time and then goes out there and beats three contenders pretty soundly, and now he's getting another crack at it against Adesanya here. So we'll take a look at Whittaker first. He's a very high-level striker. Does a great job of just kind of bouncing in and out of the pocket. He does a great job of feinting, working the leg kicks, the oblique kicks. He puts together combinations well. And, he does have a pretty diverse striking game overall. I do think he's kind of proven that he's probably the second best striker in the division behind Izzy. He's out there. He's beating pretty much everyone else in the division. His only loss being to the champ, Adesanya. His cardio, I think, checks out. He's got solid takedown defense. And on top of that, Rob has shown he could hit some takedowns as well, showing a little bit of offensive wrestling, but not a big part of his game, just something that, he's shown he could sprinkle in there once in a while. Haven't really seen him look to solidify top control time or even work in the submissions, but, I do think that with a little bit of wrestling, he could keep Izzy guessing a bit. However, the worry that I do have with Rob is probably going to be the durability. I don't think he's shown to be chinny or anything, but, he has been knocked out twice, and he has been rocked and dropped in a number of fights, but, he does a great job of getting back into it. He has shown really good recoverability and has shown he can just fight his way back into a fight, even though, he's been hurt. So while the durability is a concern, I don't think his chin is like shot or anything. Overall, though, I think Rob is a really good fighter. It's just kind of unfortunate Izzy's in the division as well, because if it wasn't for Izzy, I do feel that Rob would be a pretty dominant middleweight champ. This would probably be his fourth or fifth title defense if it wasn't for Izzy. That said, though, we'll move along. Taking a look at the champion Adesanya. He's a very tall, rangy sort of striker. He's got that kickboxing background. He's got great footwork. Really good distance management. The shot selection and accuracy and timing is all top notch. Really, he's a really good point fighter, but he's also really good at creating and finding openings to capitalize on. Overall, his striking game, his stand-up is elite. He's really good offensively, really good defensively as well. His takedown defense, checks out at middleweight. He's also shown decent submission defense as well. I think Vettori had him in a pretty nasty position, but he did a good job of fighting hands and eventually reversing as well. So I do think that Adesanya's been working on his defensive grappling, his takedown defense, on top of the fact that he's got really high level striking. So Adesanya is going to be a very tough matchup for pretty much anyone at middleweight, honestly. I'd say outside of the Yan fight, Izzy hasn't shown too many holes in his game. If there was a criticism I'd make, it's that he doesn't do particularly great when he has to lead the dance here. We saw that in the Romero fight where, Romero was just pretty much looking to counter the whole fight, and Izzy was kind of forced to just stay on the outside, just work the leg kicks, which, was a very smart game plan, but it also means he can get lulled into some of these slower paced fights. And I guess maybe against other craftier strikers, it could make it a bit closer than it should be. I don't know if that's going to be too big of a deal. I'm just kind of nitpicking here a little bit. But look, Yan already laid a blueprint on how to beat Izzy. All you have to do is match him in height and reach and have 30 pounds on him. I'm kidding, obviously. But you can kind of see why I do feel that Rob might be a bit outmatched still in this fight, because Rob is going to be giving up a good amount of reach and height, so he's going to have to find a way to get inside the pocket and not get clipped like he did in the first fight. That said, I do feel Rob can make this a pretty competitive fight. Like we saw for most of that first round, it was somewhat competitive up until Izzy got the knockdown. He probably got the read on Rob. Rob was maybe getting a little predictable with some of his movements, and he was getting pretty aggressive as well, which is somewhat uncharacteristic of a lot of Rob's fights. He did say that he was fighting a bit with his emotion in that fight, and it did kind of show a bit. He was fighting a little more reckless, a little more wild than he normally would, and he eventually did get clipped, and he got clipped twice, for end of the first round, and then the second time he did, Izzy was able to swarm in for the TKO. But up until those points, he was fighting somewhat competitively. He did a good job of really working the oblique kicks and then find openings to land his combinations and some of his counters as well. So while the fight ended in a TKO, I do feel that in a lot of the exchanges, they are actually pretty close. So I do feel that with some adjustments, I think Rob could play it a bit safer and make the second fight a lot closer than the first one. That said, though, I have a hard time seeing Rob just beat Izzy at a point fighting game here. I do still favor the striking of Izzy a bit more. And on the aggregate, I do think that Izzy's going to come out ahead in a lot of these exchanges. He could potentially clip Rob again, and and that's going to swing rounds. All it takes is a knockdown to really sway the rounds in Izzy's favor. Realistically, though, I think the only way Rob wins a decision here is if he's able to aggressively mix in the wrestling and the grappling. Look to maybe keep it close enough on the feet and then close out rounds with some clinch work, or maybe look to hit some takedowns later in the fight as maybe Izzy starts to slow down a little bit. But by and large, I just see Rob having a tough time getting ahead on the striking exchanges. So yeah, I really do believe that Rob's got to really mix in the wrestling and really showcase his overall mixed martial arts game to steal the decision here. I think we're going to see him look to attempt to hit takedowns, but I just don't think he's going to have too much success here, as he's a very tough guy to take down, and I don't think he'll be able to do enough in those exchanges to overcome what Izzy's going to be able to do on the feet. So I have Izzy winning a very competitive decision. I really don't think that Izzy's going to be able to knock Rob out again. He might come close. He might be able to hurt Rob, but overall, I think in this matchup we see a pretty close fight. It might be one of those fights where we look at in hindsight and say the value's on Rob, but I do feel that should this go to a decision, we see Izzy win most of these close decisions. So the pick for me is going to be Izzy. I think he retains his belt. But, I got a weird feeling that, Rob is going to look like the value side here. I might just take a small poke on Rob by decision, because I do think he's got paths to victory. He's just got to fight a perfect game plan here. But, ultimately, I do think he's a bit outmatched. And while I do think he's the value side, I do think Izzy's going to win the fight.